All right, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. Bruce Badgley, my buddy Ian, and wow, we've had a great week of action that we're going to take a look at wow, league play beginning for all of the teams in the WPIAL, huh?
Yep, this week they'll kick it all off, and we've had 2 weeks of the last 2 weeks where about half of the conferences played conference games, and had a few really big matchups this past week, including Belle Vernon topping Thomas Jefferson in a matchup of two of the premier teams in 4A this year, not just in the WPIAL but across the state. I mean, I think in the Penn Live state rankings they were number 1 and number 3 or something like that. So even coming into the game, this was a premier matchup statewide, and they just happened to be playing in the same conference. And just to set some context up here, for what this game is and what it meant, so Belle Vernon installed gold turf at their stadium in 2015, right? And since then they hadn't been great. They'd kind of been like a 500-ish program, would make the playoffs but wouldn't win games or anything. So in 2015 they won. After they installed the gold turf, they won their first playoff game since 2000. And since then, so 2015 included, Belle Vernon is 30-2 at home on the gold turf, and that's including this win over Thomas Jefferson that they just had. So the gold turf has certainly made a big difference in their performance, and we may be having Belle Vernon head coach Matt Humbert on the show with us too, and we can ask him about how much of a difference the gold turf has made in their performance. But in that same time span since 2015, this is just the 5th conference loss that Thomas Jefferson has had. So, I mean, think about that. That's 7 years. They've only lost 5 times, and 3 of those were to Belle Vernon. So this was the 3rd time Belle Vernon beat them in those 7 years. But still, that's quite the accomplishment. I mean, Thomas Jefferson's basically been their white whale, right? That they've been right. the Moby Dick that they've been out on the ocean hunting all this time. And Belle Vernon's been close. And even in the couple years that Belle Vernon beat TJ in the regular season, TJ came back and won the WPIAL title that year in the playoffs. And TJ beat Belle Vernon a couple times in the playoffs. So it's really been the giant they've been struggling to slay. And it was an epic game, man. I mean, it was back and forth. In the first half, Belle Vernon running back Quentin Martin scored 2 touchdowns. Thomas Jefferson's quarterback Joe Lesky scored 2, so it was 14-14. Quentin Martin went out with an injury shortly into the second half. Looks like he's going to be okay, which is great. I mean, he's only a sophomore, but he's a sensational player. And then Joe Lesky scored early in the 4th quarter for TJ, and it was kind of like, okay, here we go again. TJ scored. And then Devin Whitlock, Belle Vernon's star quarterback that was our 4A player of the year last year, was our player of the week a few weeks ago, scores a touchdown with about 4 minutes left. And then the Belle Vernon's defense gets a stop. They get the ball back and get it across midfield, and it's like 4th down and 14 with like 9 seconds left in the game. So just to set the stage here, 4th and 14 with 9 seconds left in the game.
I love that turf. That's all I got to say.
I told you
that is so cool.
The gold turf makes a huge difference. So here we go. 9 seconds left, 4th and 14. Belle Vernon comes out. They're not going to punt. They're going to run a play. And Devin Whitlock, the quarterback, is just going to keep it and go all the way, basically for the walk-off winner to beat Thomas Jefferson. I mean, I think there was like 3 seconds left, but my goodness, what a way to end the game and to, beat the team that's kind of been your big rival over the last few years. I mean, maybe not so much as a historical rival, but they've been pretty big rivals over the last decade or so that, TJ's been the team Belle Vernon just hasn't been able to top. So incredible performance all around. And not just, the star players, Martin and Whitlock, but, the lineman, Cole Waitman on the defensive line and tight end throwing a key block to spring Whitlock there. And a bunch of other guys, the dudes up front for Belle Vernon just did a fantastic job against a really good Thomas Jefferson line. It was just a really good game back and forth. And, this result, I mean, I think I picked Belle Vernon before the season, just because I felt like Belle Vernon had guys coming back and TJ had guys to replace. So I kind of thought like if any year was the year that Belle Vernon could do it, they had the players to potentially do it this year. And, as we get further down the road of the 4A season, I think Aliquippa will have something to say before the end of it about who's going to win the title. But
Right.
nevertheless, it's TJ, it's Belle Vernon, it's Aliquippa, and probably McKeesport too, who's also in a conference with TJ and Belle Vernon. So don't sleep on McKeesport either. They're just in the same conference that you have, 3 of the best 4A teams all in the same conference. So let's talk about this past week, and everything. So thanks to everyone for tuning into the show. It's where to find us on YouTube, Twitter, all that. And this past week, obviously the biggest win was Belle Vernon's victory over Thomas Jefferson that we just talked about. Incredible performance all around, puts Belle Vernon really in the driver's seat in that conference, although they still have a game against McKeesport coming up in a few weeks. And we'll get into kind of the conference breakdown in a little bit as well. Some other really exciting games this past week. Mohawk and New Brighton went back and forth all game, and then Mohawk got the ball back with about 7 minutes left and were able to put together a 7-minute drive to just grind the clock out and then take knees at the end. New Brighton just couldn't stop them at the end. So Mohawk gets another big win after winning just one conference game last year. That's 2 this year. So they're on a bit of a hot streak here, and 2 kind of, decent to middle of the pack teams that they beat. They beat Neshannock and New Brighton. Now, Mohawk's been one of the more exciting teams. They beat Neshannock by 8 and New Brighton by 2. So both of their conference wins were, by fewer than 10 points combined. So, or 10 total points. But yeah, fun team to watch right now. And then California and Mapletown, I'll talk a little bit more about that game, but once again, just a back and forth game, and California just got the last touchdown on them to beat Mapletown down in the 1A tri-county.
Oh, here comes Matt. Okay.
All right, great. Yeah, we will talk to him now.
And coming on board here, Matt Humbert. There's Matt. Hey, Matt, how are you? Bruce Badgley, Ian McMeans. Thanks for joining us tonight, Coach.
Absolutely, gentlemen. How you guys doing?
Great.
Oh, we're doing fantastic. You as a District 3 guy, and across Pennsylvania, you had a big win, obviously, over Thomas Jefferson last week, and quite honestly, you kind of gave the rest of the state some hope. I mean, that those guys, were not invincible. So talk a little bit about, that game and the game plan you had going in, and, what really made the difference.
Well, I mean, TJ's, they're a yearly contender. We face them every year in the regular season, and we faced them in 2019 in the WPIAL championship, and we've had some success against them in the past. In 15, we beat them. In 17, we beat them. However, they kind of always got the last laugh, so to speak, because when the games kind of matter, they've been able to clip us, especially in 2 semifinals, and then obviously at Hines, the WPIAL championship. So, coming in this year, they are cookie cutter to what they've been in the past. I mean, they are a very big physical football team. I think when you look at their roster size in terms of the depth and the number of kids they have, and then when you look at their physical size, it's hard to imagine that, many teams in Southwestern Pennsylvania in any classification can kind of match up to them. So, it was just one of those contests where a lot of hype was surrounding it. I mean, we're a pretty solid ball club, and obviously they are, and they have all the hardware to prove it, and they're coming off 2, state championships back-to-back years. So, we just knew we were both on a collision course. We both crossovered against 5A teams, number 1 in Gateway, number 2, and we both had success against those 2 teams. So, kind of the moons aligned, so to speak, and a lot of publicity and hype kind of, propelled this game to be pretty big. And it was a special night, big atmosphere. I guess the best way I could kind of summarize it is kind of rival maybe some small level, if not mid-level college football. And, we just went out there and the kids played physical, and, we did what we could to quell the physicality of their up front on the O-line and D-line, and we made some plays when it mattered, and we were victorious for it.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for joining us, Coach. We really appreciate it. Like Bruce said, he's the D3 guy. I'm the WPIAL guy, and we kind of started doing this show last year so that he could learn a little more about the WPIAL teams that were potentially going to face the D3 teams when they got to, the state semifinals, and having a lot of fun with it so far. And we really appreciate you taking the time. So we started the show with a little introduction, and I showed the highlight of Devin Whitlock's game-winning walk-off touchdown. And Bruce has been really impressed by the story of the gold turf. That you guys are 30-2 on the gold turf since 2015. So I know you've also been the athletic director there, so as well as the head coach. So what all went into the decision to go with the gold turf, and how's it? Does it really impact the performance of the team?
So we have a lot of fun with it. And I think one of the things that, I really strive to do, and we've done a good job of, is kind of branding it and making it fun and kind of making it unique. We affectionately dub it the beach, and we have all kinds of different theming things off of it. But the funny thing is, when I got there in 15, they were putting it in. So I really didn't have much of a say of the gold turf. Now, I kind of spin the story though. So I like to tell people when they talk about the gold turf, I ask them, well, do you like it? And if they say yes, then I say, well, yeah, of course, I was the guy who came up with the idea of the gold turf. If they say no, then I say, yeah, that was,
you got plausible deniability.
Absolutely. Yeah. But to be honest with you, if I thought it was a great idea to add that, we had some hiccups with it early on that 15 season, just because the mix that went into it had nothing to do with the gold turf. The mix and the underlay that went into it wasn't really adequate. So eventually we got it right in the formula. We got it right. So it's a lot of fun, and the kids get into it, and the community gets into it, and we theme it with everything. We have us annual 7-on-7. We call it the Gold Bowl, and we do a bunch of little things with the beach nuances. One of the funny things is, being the athletic director, on a Friday, I'm just running around crazy. I really don't even bat an eyelash at football until after about 3:30 every Friday, which people find hard to believe, because I'm just getting everything ready throughout the day. And my little addition that I'm super proud of is we got a lifeguard stand in the back of the end zone. And so we kind of unveiled that for TJ, and our principals are awesome guys. They had lifeguard shirts, and they were up in the lifeguard stand. So, that's the fun thing about interscholastic sports. And, we try to have fun with it, and especially in this chaotic time frame that we're all living over the past year, man. Sometimes you just need to kind of embrace life a little bit, have fun with it, not get too wound up and tied up in the moment. And the beach allows us to kind of escape that and have some fun with it.
That's awesome. That's
so cool. That is so classic, man. That is fantastic. That was the first time that I saw like a highlight when Ian was playing, the game-winning play. And I broadcast games, I watch a lot of film, but to see it out there, it was like so classic, man. I can understand why you embrace it. So
we love it. I love it. It's like I said, it's a hate or love thing. A lot of people don't like it, but it is what it is. The kids love it. The community loves it. We always have fun with it. And I think we were literally probably the only gold school, or the gold turf school, I want to say east of the Mississippi River, for a long time. But The funny thing is, Milton Hershey actually got something very similar to that. I remember talking to their athletic director. Yeah, I remember talking to their athletic director. I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And they were kind of talking about, we're looking to go to this because their colors, I don't know if their colors are gold, but they're kind of like a brownish
gold they are.
Color. And so he was talking about it, and they were investigating it. But then I never really kept communication with them. I didn't know if they pulled the trigger or not. And
I don't think they did. I broadcast.
They actually did, because the funny thing is, we're big Hershey people. We go there probably twice a year with the family. And I remember we went over this last Christmas. And when I go up there, I like to run. And so I was running around Milton Hershey, because I think it's just such a neat campus,
beautiful place. Beautiful place.
Such a neat school. You know what I mean? So I was proud of myself, because I got 6 miles that day. I never run 6 miles. But anyway, side story. So I'm running around their field and I look over, I'm like, holy crap, they got the gold turf.
Wow. I haven't been over in a couple years. It's been maybe 3 or 4 years since I broadcast a game over there. And
Sure.
that's pretty classic stuff. I mean, but
Yeah,
I can understand what
they're
them.
kind of stealing our thunder a little bit, but I guess if anybody can do it and pull it off, I'm happy they were able to.
Well, good.
It certainly helps that you guys have had such success on the gold turf too. I mean, a 30-2 home record is nothing to sniff at either. So this
and
week
the only 2 losses were Thomas Jefferson. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually, Bruce and I were just talking about it that TJ's only had 5 conference losses since 2015, and you guys have dealt them 3 of them now. So that's a pretty big accomplishment that, that's kind of just been the white whale of the whole Big 8 conference, that you guys have really been the only ones able to slay it.
Yeah. And, it was a good game and we're fortunate and, we're excited about, what we accomplished Friday. However, you kind of live in the moment for about 24 hours and you flip the chapter because there's so much football left. And we know we'll see them, as long as we take care of what we need to take care of and control what we need to control. We know we'll see them eventually in the near future again. So, we just trying to do everything if we do see them to not let history repeat itself and them get the better of us in games in November. So, but it's all fun and dandy. We got 4 conference opponents that we need to really take care of over the next 4 weeks.
So speaking of those conference opponents, you have Laurel Highlands coming in this week, who's also off to a 5-0 start, which is their best start in school history. And that's your alma mater too, correct?
It is. Yeah. So, excited for the Stangs, excited to see them getting a lot of publicity and whatnot. I think some people criticize them because the opponent level that they've faced hasn't been stellar, but, to win 5 games, regardless of who you're playing, I think that's a tough task. So excited for them and really selfishly excited for us because, you knock off a team like TJ and we don't really dabble into the letdowns and, our guys are calculated and our coaches are very systematic in how they approach every game and how they motivate kids and, knock on wood that nothing changes this week. But what I'm getting at is, we had a Penn Trafford game that was a big game. We had a TJ game that was a big game. And now, usually the Mustangs over the past few years haven't been stellar. They're always competitive, but they haven't really taken that next step. And so you can't ask for a better situation because you got a team 5-0 coming to the beach. And it's just one of those things where in the past, you'd have that TJ game or that Keysport game. And then, you'd have some games where sometimes it wasn't as competitive as you'd like. And, we're going to have a good game coming off that TJ one. So it's nice to keep those meaningful games going opposed to just hitting a couple opponents who, as long as you do what you're supposed to do, you should be victorious.
Talk a little bit about your coaching staff. Obviously it's not just a one-man show. You have,
and you know what? I think as many interviews as I do and as any coach does in any sport realm, we tend to really focus a lot on, a specific kid or two or, the team. And I think I'm happy you asked that question. I really am, because I feel like a lot of times coaches get overshadowed and, those are the guys that are putting in the long hours and doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I know when I was in high school, I never appreciated that. And I think as a kid, you're just viewing everything through a prism of a 17-year-old kid. You don't see all of the additional things that go on. And I could have never imagined or appreciated all the stuff that coaches do and that all that we do. I think our kids have a good understanding of that. But, our defensive coaches did a phenomenal job. There was 2 drives in the fourth quarter against Thomas Jefferson where they had 3 and outs. And that's something that's not an easy feat to accomplish. Brett Barish has been my defensive coordinator since my early days at Ringgold, and he's a Belle Vernon guy, and he's done a great job. Jeff Obradowski and Aaron Zackel and Mike Stieber, they all are guys that, are just such good coaches. You look at Mike, I just mentioned him, and, I got Bo Teets on offense and Scott Nee on offense as well. Those guys are all 3 former head coaches in football. Wow. So when you have guys like that on your staff, that helps. And then, I got a guy by the name of Frank Busino. He's a head basketball coach at Southmoreland. So it's nice to have that head coaching element on our staff as well. And we got a great strength guy. We got a full-time strength guy who does a fantastic job, Tim Livingston. And, you know, to kind of round out everything else, I got a guy that's been with me for a long time named Jim McGinley, who just does a really good job with the kids and would do anything for the kids. So I'm fortunate. That's just the main components of my guys. I have a lot of other guys that facilitate different roles, but, you know, I'm kind of fortunate that I have those guys to lean on, and they do a lot of things for us.
Well, it's clear to me when I talk to any successful program that it isn't just the head coach. I mean, it is, you know, a coaching staff that, you know, provides that leadership. And as you talked about, with so many head coaches, it's got to be easy for you then to focus on what you need to, because you have such total confidence in what, you know, the staff is doing to get the team ready. So that's exemplary.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like I said, we tend to, you know, try to put a lot of eggs on the defensive side, and you know, there's we have a good amount of guys in that war room for the defensive stuff, and I really kind of lean on Scott and Bo with a lot of our offensive stuff. They do a lot of prep for me, and you know, they do a good job. And kind of the thing that a lot of people I know that I've already been talked about, or I've already had the questions, because I am a Laurel Highlands guy. Actually, my offensive line coach, I just mentioned, Scott, you know, he was my head coach in high school. So
Wow. That's,
you know,
incredible.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting little stories. So you know, he's just a really good football coach, and I don't know if there's any guy better at just watching film and evaluating film. So you know, I think that's one key too to success. I mean, you know, we haven't won a WPIAL championship yet. We've been to 5 semifinal appearances. We've been to to Hines once, and we haven't come away with that. And it's always Thomas Jefferson that's typically in our way. But, you know, I think you always get that question a lot, like what makes a successful program and whatnot. And there's really not one thing. I mean, you have to have good kids. There's no doubt about it, but you have to have good coaches. But I think one of the keys, if we're on the coaching topic, is the consistency. I mean, a lot of these guys have been with me for a while, and, you know, I always just see different schools and how they're rotating coaches, and it's hard to find coaches. It's hard to keep coaches. And so I am blessed because my core guys have been with me, and everyone has a skin in the game. You know, there's no one that doesn't have a say, and everyone has a large amount of responsibility in what we do offensively and defensively. But I think that's a key to success is being able to have that staff and that consistent staff. And I think kids might not appreciate that enough, you know, to have that consistency. But kudos to my guys, because I couldn't do anything without them.
Good.
And I agree. That's why I asked the question. So go ahead, Ian.
It's a great question. I'm happy you asked that.
Yeah. I think I mean, Matt, you've been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And, you know, I think you covered pretty much everything else I had on my list. You know, I was going to ask where you go from here, but you kind of already said, you know, hey, we're going to see Thomas Jefferson again. We got to take care of business against our conference opponents. So congratulations on the big win. And, you know, we saw that Quentin Martin got hurt. He said on Twitter that he's going to be okay. So send out our best wishes to him. Hopefully
Absolutely.
he's able to recover quickly. Just any parting thoughts for the fans as you head out into the rest of the season? I mean, I know you guys got a tough conference schedule. We interviewed Coach Colasar from Laurel Highlands a few weeks ago, and at that point, I think, you know, the conference as a whole was like 25-2 or something like that after a few weeks of the season. So it's, you know, you've got a tough road to hoe here, but best of luck the rest of the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We got you know, LH, Ringgold, Trinity. And then we have McKeesport, you know, so that was a good game last year. We were able to kind of, you know, have a good outing against them. And then they ended up beating TJ at the end of the season. And you know, that kind of propelled us 3 to share that conference championship. But yeah, we got 4 very meaningful games. And like I said, the neat thing about this Laurel Highlands game is because it's starting to gradually gain some hype because it's the battle of 2 unbeaten teams, which is understandable. But, you know, like I said, we're fortunate that we don't have to kind of step down off a cliff after that TJ game, because we don't really have much time to enjoy that win, because we got to get ready for the Stangs coming down to our place. And we're fortunate again to be playing in another big game.
Yeah. And I've kind of said all year, two of the most exciting players with the ball in their hands in the WPIAL are both in the same conference, in Devin Whitlock and Rodney Gallagher. So, and that's not a slight at anyone else. It's just, the things that those guys are able to do. And now we get to see them play head to head this week. So I'm really looking forward to it. Actually, I was talking to my wife about taking the family down for the game because
let me know. Come on down. We'll hook you up. We'll get you in the hospitality suite. We'll do what we need to do for you. So you just let me know.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
And if you play your cards right, you know what I mean? Maybe you get in on some of the stadium sponsorships, you might be able to play lifeguard at the beach and sit for a quarter. I'm starting to maybe think about offering that as a fundraiser a little bit.
That's a really good idea.
Absolutely.
Play lifeguard for a quarter or something like that.
Yeah,
So maybe I'll have that up and running by Friday.
That sounds like a plan. Awesome. It sounds like a plan. I tell you what, Coach, thank you very much. Really, I'm honored. It's a pleasure to meet you, and best of luck the rest of the season. Okay.
No, I appreciate that, guys.
All right, see you. Just go ahead and exit out, and we'll be on our way. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, take care, guys. Thank you.
Right,
thanks so much.
Wow. I mean, incredible. I mean,
great interview, and I mean he's one of the rising stars in the coaching ranks.
I can tell.
He's got his first head coaching full-time job in 2010. He was actually an interim coach for 2 games in 2009 at Ringgold, but for his career so far, for basically just coaching a little more than a decade, he's 91-29 overall, has a 758 winning percentage. I mean, just the results speak for itself, right? That he took a Ringgold team that was not great, took them to the playoffs a few years, and won a couple playoff games there. Then took over a Belle Vernon program in 2014. And like I said earlier, in 2015, they won their first playoff game since 2000. And now they've made 4 straight WPIAL semifinals, reached the WPIAL championship in 2019. So, I mean, Matt's just an all-star. He's a great head coach and doing some really good things down there with the Belle Vernon program.
On a personal level, having the opportunity to meet men like, Coach Humbert, Humbert and this kind of setting is special for me. I mean, it's very uplifting for me to see how our younger generation is being, moved forward by such great guys, and so, kudos to Belle Vernon and the beach. And I've got like my new best field, the beach. So
got to come out and visit it sometime. I'm going to try and visit it this week. We'll see.
Yeah.
Take my tour of the WPIAL there. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. So onward and upward.
Onward we go. So just getting back to some of the key results from last week. We talked obviously about Belle Vernon's big win, the games of the week, the upset of the week. Northgate, whose head coach Mike Fulmore we had on early this year when they snapped their long losing streak, snapped another long losing streak. This was a conference losing streak by beating Union, whose head coach Stacy Robinson we had on last week, after Union upset Rochester. So that was a big surprise there with Northgate, but congratulations to the Flames, able to pull that one off. And we had some other noteworthy results too. Rematch of the 6A championship game from last year. Central Catholic's defense really dominated North Allegheny. Pine Richland, reports of their demise may have been a little premature. And we kind of said from the beginning of the year, we thought Pine Richland had some guys to replace, had a whole new coaching staff. We didn't think they were going to be as good as they were last year. We knew they were going to take a step back. The question was just how far back. And I said on our preview show that I thought they were still good enough to at least make the semifinals, probably make the WPIAL championship game, but there were some other really good teams that, could contend with them for the title. And Gateway was the number 1 ranked team in 5A coming into that game. So Pine Richland showed they're still the team to beat, even though they had those 3 losses against 6A opponents to start the season. Now they get to move into conference play and should cruise on into the playoffs. I think there's some other good teams in their conference, like Kiski, who's off to a 5-0 start, one of just 2 teams in 5A that's still undefeated. So that was a matchup of unbeaten teams.
That's
Kiski
who I've got
West
my eye
Allegheny.
on. I mean, 5A, 3A, 6. I mean, the ones that are, obviously pertinent here with District 3, 12-1. I mean, I'm keeping my eye on. And quite honestly, when I saw that thing about Kiski, I'm going like, all right, I mean, time to like, do the deep dive on those guys.
Yeah. I mean, they're in a conference with Thomas. Sorry, I'm still thinking about Belle Vernon and Thomas Jefferson. It was such a good game. No, Kiski's in a conference with Pine Richland. So those two will
That'll
meet,
all work itself
and
out.
and Penn Hills is in that conference too, and don't sleep on them because they've been playing really well too. Some other matchups of undefeated teams: Hampton beat Highlands in 4A. Washington beat Chartiers Houston in 2A. North Catholic beat East Allegheny pretty handily in our 3A game of the week, and then in 1A, Leechburg beat Springdale 41-22, and it wasn't even really that close because of the performance of our Brute Athletic Player of the Week, Thomas. How about that segue? Thomas Burke from Leechburg, who had 5 total touchdowns, 328 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. And he threw for 243 yards and had all 5 of those touchdowns in the first half.
Well, he could have at least given us, or he could have at least gotten a picture where you could see his face. I mean, you can't see it.
I took that from his Twitter page.
That's okay.
But we have a Thomas Burke highlight here against Springdale. Here we go. So here he is playing quarterback and just launches a bomb down the sidelines, hits the receiver in stride for a monster touchdown.
Wow.
Yeah. So great ball down the sideline by Thomas Burke on that one. 5 touchdown performance. Really, really good stuff. And Leechburg is a team that has not made the playoffs since the late 1980s. They have the longest playoff drought in the WPIAL. And this conference win over Springdale now is a big step forward to potentially breaking that 32-year playoff drought for the Blue Devils.
All right.
So, yeah, some of our other top performers this week, Devin Whitlock from Belle Vernon, didn't quite have some of the gaudy numbers in the past, but I mean, that walk-off game-winning touchdown is certainly, a big performance in a big game against a big opponent, enough to land him on the list. Kevon Markwood from South Allegheny had 4 total touchdowns, 2 rushing, 1 receiving, and 1 on a blocked punt return. Rodney Gallagher from Laurel Highlands, once again, just been lighting it up. We get to see Whitlock against Gallagher this coming week. Gallagher just doing it all. And then I mentioned that California Mapletown game earlier, sort of a co-mention here for Damani Stafford and Landon Stevenson from Cal and Mapletown. Both ran for over 200 yards. Stafford had 4 touchdowns, including the game winner, and Stevenson had 3 touchdowns. Just a great back and forth battle between those two teams that, as we saw, California won 34-28. So, really, really good performance all around by those two guys. And, that's one of those games where whoever scores last wins, and Stafford got the last touchdown.
Right. All right,
so,
cool.
Talking about some streaks here, all of the active losing streaks continued on. There's 17 remaining winless teams. Last week, we entered the week with 20 unbeaten teams, and the only 4 that lost were the 4 that played against other unbeaten teams. So 16 unbeaten teams remain. 2 of them were in the top 5 for winning streaks, and Thomas Jefferson with their loss to Belle Vernon, and then Highlands with their loss to Hampton. So now actually everyone below Ligonier Valley basically does not have any carryover wins from last year. Ligonier Valley and Bishop Canavan are the only 2 remaining, plus Central Valley, obviously, teams with kind of carryover wins. That everyone else below them on the list would be teams that are off to 5-0 starts this season. And then as far as conference winning streaks go, my alma mater, North Catholic, have to throw this one in there. Their win over East Allegheny extends their longest conference winning streak in the WPIAL to 21 games. And then Northgate, as we mentioned, that snapped their 32-game overall losing streak earlier this year, snapped their 26-game conference losing streak with that win over Union this past week. So that was a big win, first conference win since week 4 of 2017 for Northgate. Congratulations to them. And yeah, so some long streaks continuing, but now as we get further into conference play, teams will have a bit more of an opportunity to either continue or break some of these streaks.
I love that. I love the streak part. And, I also love the fact that we've got Andrew Cohen and Get Recruited as, our main sponsor here on the WPIAL Blitz show. Andrew is, getting ready to, I think, formally announce the fact that he's going to have a camp, out in your area come this spring, but he's actually having one in December in Scranton to give, some kids who are looking for that, extra little push, a look up there. Get recruited. I'd highly recommend everybody, just giving Andrew a call, 570-428-2872. Whether you're a client or not, Andrew will answer your questions. You give him a direct question, he's going to give you a direct answer. He's here to help kids and families. So thank you to Andrew Cohen and GetRecruitedConsulting.com.
All right. Sorry about that. I bumped the button to move
That's
it
all
forward
right.
a couple of times.
That's okay.
So now we are moving on to week 5 of the season, where, as we mentioned, everyone is now moving into conference play. So the conferences that are highlighted here in yellow are teams that have already started conference play. The ones that are in white are the remaining ones that will start conference play this week. And we threw it out there on Twitter that if people had any questions to ask us, they could send us. So we got a couple questions from the fans this week.
Great.
Yes. So one of them from Nathan Grella, who
Nathan.
Yeah,
I know Nathan. Thanks,
Backyard
Nathan.
PA podcast. He does a really good job with that. So check out I think it's actually PA Backyard Football podcast. So yeah, check that one out. They do a good job. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yes, how do we feel about the extended playoffs this year? He said he'd like to see an extra week of practice at the beginning of the year rather than seeing, a really good team like, say, Clairton blow out a somewhat mediocre team at the beginning of the playoffs. So here's what I'll say to that is that, last year's playoffs, which was a shorter than what we had before, with just 8 teams making it, felt like there were some really good teams that missed the playoffs that, maybe not teams that could contend for a WPIAL title, but teams that were good enough to potentially win a couple playoff games, missed out last year. So this year we're seeing kind of the full vision of the WPIAL's kind of realignment of the playoffs. So they did this in 2020 with the idea that more teams would make it because, some of it's imbalanced, right? You got 15 teams in 1A, you've got 12 teams in 3A, you've got 13 teams in 4A. So there's going to be buys, right? Before it was either 8 or 16. But in 2020, they moved to this format where there's going to be some teams with buys, some teams without. And we'll see. So I'll say, Nathan, I'm excited to see how it works this year. I think some of them, the numbers may be a little bit high, but given the format that they've set up where, playoff teams are just based on conference wins and conference record, that this is better than what they had before. I think I would rather see more, personally, I would rather see more like wild card spots and maybe fewer playoff qualifiers. But, I talk a lot about the 2016 season, when in 3A especially, when only 8 teams from the WPIAL made the playoffs. Beaver was the number 1 ranked 3A team in the state. They lost their last game of the season. I think it was to Aliquippa, and Beaver beat Aliquippa that year. Might have been to Central Valley. And Beaver wound up missing the playoffs because of tiebreakers. They finished 4th in the conference, and only 3 from the conference could make the playoffs. So they went from being the number 1 ranked 3A team in the state to missing the playoffs, and that was just a bad situation. So I think I would rather see, maybe just like the top 2 teams are automatic qualifiers, and then a committee or somebody picks the next 8 or 10 teams that make I guess top 2 from each conference maybe are automatic qualifiers, and then a committee would pick the next handful of teams that would make the playoffs.
Look, I'm a big fan of power rankings. And quite honestly, I think the reason why they have the extra teams is to make more money. I mean, and it's
to give more opportunities to some of the teams, I think, so that you don't have that situation like Beaver did in 2015 or 16. Sorry, 16.
Yeah, I do believe that there's a money factor involved here, though, too.
Yeah. And then our other question came from the Brownsville basketball and football fan account, account. And they asked if the WPIAL should allow athletic directors to form conferences like they did back in the 1970s, rather than the WPIAL assigning teams into conferences. And I know this is something we've talked a bit about with, how conferences are set up and all that. I think, just realistically right now, the WPIAL, the benefit of having them set up the conferences is you're guaranteed to have a conference. There were teams back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, not so much 80s, 60s and 70s more so, that were essentially independent teams without a conference that had to then go out and find a whole schedule worth of teams if an athletic director couldn't find their way into a conference. So it does guarantee that you'll have a set number of games and opponents and things like that. The thing it could open up on the other side, though, if they did let athletic directors make their own conferences, would be for some of the teams like Brownsville and Uniontown and some of those other Albert Gallatin, the teams down in Fayette County, in Westmoreland County, Lower Westmoreland County, in Greene County, some of those more rural schools that haven't had as much success lately, to potentially kind of make their own leagues and not get forced into a certain classification. I think it's particularly pertinent for Brownsville, because Brownsville was a 2A program that had been struggling for a while and got their enrollment bumped them up to 3A, and now they're struggling even more. They're the only team in the WPIAL that hasn't scored a point yet this season. It's really hard times for Brownsville, and being able to kind of choose your opponents in a sense may have some benefit. And we've seen some teams, Albert Gallatin a couple years ago, Uniontown last year, opted out of the WPIAL and made their own independent schedule. So, is that a trend that's going to continue for some of these teams that are struggling? Maybe it will. We'll see where it goes. But personally, I like sort of the guarantees of having conferences being set up. I think there's some randomness that could happen, but I also see the benefit in sort of the more geographically aligned conferences, even if it has teams from multiple classifications in it, which I think could be a lot of fun because you get a lot of those historic rivalries.
Well, I mean, the majority of the state allows the athletic directors to make their schedules. I think the toothpaste is out of the tube when it comes to the WPIAL. I don't think that there's any way there's going to be like any wholesale changing of the guard, and then all of a sudden, one cycle, the athletic director. I think the athletic directors out there like the fact that they don't have to worry about the schedule. Yeah. So, but should the WPIA allow it? Well, that's the question. I think that they should. Will that actually happen? I don't think there's any chance it'll happen.
And maybe there's some interim solution where the athletic directors have a little bit more of a say in how the conferences are aligned or things like that. But rather than just the WPIAL deciding what they're going to be. So maybe there's an interim. But yeah. So thank you to Nathan and to the Brownsville account for sending us questions this week.
Thanks, Nathan.
Anyone else who's interested in having a question answered on the show?
Remember being on the sidelines with Nathan, covering games and stuff like that. He's a good man.
Yeah. Yes. So let's talk a little bit real quick before we go here about the conference standings and how they are all set up now as we're moving into conference play. So conference record is the first determining factor, and then head-to-head results is the first tiebreaker, followed by Gardner Points, which is a strength of victory metric. So you get 100 Gardner Points per victory and then 10 per victory of each team you defeated. So if you beat a team that has 5 wins, and it's only conference games that count too. So then you get 150 Gardner Points for that win. Usually when I show them in my standings, I don't count that 100 points per victory, just because conference record at the beginning is the determining factor. So you're not going to see a tie between teams where that 100 points would come into play. And the reason it's there is because historically, way back in the 1920s when Gardner Points were invented, they gave 100 points per victory and 50 points per tie. So those ties and hundreds did kind of factor in. And then the WPIAL tiebreaker system, which is a margin of victory metric. So depending on the game results, you can either get up to plus 10 or minus 10. If you win by less than 10, like if you win by 7, you only get plus 7, your opponent gets minus 7. If you win by more than 10, the 10 is the maximum that you get. And according to WPIAL plus 10, even though they get shown by newspapers as like a 1-0 win or a 2-0 win, for this metric they count as a plus 10 or minus 10.
Oh my, okay.
So we'll run through some some key games and some standings. Obviously, we're still very early in the season, so the standings are highly subject to change at this point in time. But in 6A, we've got two big games between really the top Finn and then Seneca Valley taking on Central Catholic. Those were the 4 playoff teams last year. They're kind of expected to be the top 4 teams this year. Cannon McMillan's going to be good. I think they'll be the other playoff team. Five teams here are going to make the playoffs. So I think even now, just 2 games into the season, we've kind of seen that stratification of, I think the top 5 teams are going to be the 5 that make the playoffs. Just in conference games yet, so I'm just showing overall records. Kiski and Moon are the only undefeated teams, but Gateway and Penn Trafford I still think are really good teams. Peters Township's been a bit of a surprise so far this year, just because they had to replace 8 starters from their team. They went to the WPIAL championship game last year. But anytime you have to replace 18 starters or 18 seniors, sorry, 18 seniors.
That's a lot.
Not 18 starters. My bad. But still, 18 seniors is a lot to replace. Yeah. And so we'll see how that all shakes out. The Allegheny 6 conference has been really good head to head against the other conferences. And then actually the Big East has not been as good head to head as I thought they were going to be. But now that we're into conference play, we'll see what happens. Like we said, got a big game. Penn Hills against Pine Richland, who are the top 2 teams from the Northeast Conference last year, facing off, and we have the other top 2 teams in that conference. So we'll start to see some stratification there, and teams really putting their best foot forward. And in the Allegheny 6, I mean, every week's going to be a big game. Honestly, those 6 teams are probably all playoff caliber teams this year. Unfortunately, only 4 are going to make it from each conference. So we'll see what happens. In 4A, so we've had some conference games here. We talked about Belle Vernon playing Laurel Highlands this week, and one of the biggest matchups of the week across the WPIAL, 2 undefeated teams. Belle Vernon's big win over Thomas Jefferson edges them out in the Gardner Points here, right? Because as we talk about the tiebreakers, Laurel Highlands has 2 wins over Ringgold and West Mifflin, who have not won any conference games. They don't get any additional Gardner Points there, whereas Thomas Jefferson has 1 conference win, so Belle Vernon gets the edge in the Gardner Points there.
Right.
The Greater Allegheny Conference, which we've talked about in the past, has always been one that's kind of crazy. It is proven to be crazy once again, right? You had, Plum beat Mars in a battle of winless teams last week, of teams that had, finished at the top of the standings last year. Indiana beat Plum, but then went out and lost to Greensburg Salem. Highlands beat Mars.
I know, man.
My
team went
down.
A
lot of teams that have been. Yeah. So, but we've got Hampton against Greensburg Salem this week in a battle of the 2 teams at the top of the conference. But I fully expect this one to get a little bit messy as we continue on, that there's probably going to be a lot of teams in the middle of the pack here that just beat on each other. And we'll see what happens come playoff time and how it all gets sorted out. This is one where the tiebreakers are definitely going to be important to keep an eye on as we move forward. The Parkway Conference is starting conference play this week. So Beaver against Aliquippa, teams from just down the road or down the river from each other, however you want to look at. Quality teams in this conference that we'll see how it all shakes out when we get to playoff time. Catholic is, after beating East Allegheny last week, kind of the team to beat in the conference. Deer Lakes, definitely the surprising team so far. Deer Lakes was winless last year, didn't win a single game, then beat Derry 49-0 2 weeks ago, and then beat Valley 6-0 last, or 7-0 last week, or no, 6-0, sorry, 6-0 last week. So now Deer Lakes, who went winless last year, is 2-0, and 4 teams from this conference are going to make the playoffs. So
Wow.
Deer Lakes with 2 wins already is in pretty good shape to contend for a playoff spot, right? Like they might just have to win one more game and be able to make the playoffs. So yeah, another really good story there to keep an eye on.
Just another
East
coach
Allegheny
to get on the radar.
Probably the other 2 good contenders. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the Allegheny 7. in the Interstate Conference, Mount Pleasant dominated their rivals Southmoreland this past week with a 34-7 victory. Congratulations to the Vikings. South Park, who struggled a little bit out of the gates, won their first 2 games, but their 2 wins were over York and Brownsville, the bottom 2 teams in the conference. As I mentioned, Brownsville is the only team that hasn't scored yet this season. South Park has a big game against defending conference champion and defending WPIAL runner-up Elizabeth Forward to kind of see where they sit in the sort of pecking order at the top of the conference here. The Northwest 6 Conference hasn't played a conference game yet, so they start this week, a big game between Keystone Oaks and Avonworth here. And that game last year, Keystone Oaks just edged out Avonworth by a touchdown, and that wound up being the deciding factor in who made the playoffs, because the WPIAL did not select Avonworth to make the playoffs last year. And so last year they had selection committees. They didn't have this formula for who was going to all make the playoffs. But this is another one where it's a numbers game, right? 4 of these teams are going to make the playoffs. So, Central Valley, Avonworth, Keystone Oaks looking pretty good so far. But then one out of the bottom 3 group here between Quaker Valley, Hopewell, and Ambridge is going to make the playoffs. So I think that gets to some of Nathan's question of, are there too many teams in the playoffs potentially? So we'll see how it all shakes out by the end of the year. But something to keep an eye on, that one of those teams that have off to a struggling start is going to make the playoffs. Moving on to 2A, where 2 conferences have started conference play already, and 2 more will start this week. So as we kind of thought at the beginning of the year, Washington and McGuffey have kind of asserted themselves at the top of the Century Conference so far. Charleroi, who beat Waynesburg last week, but has struggled, really struggled offensively this year, takes on Chartiers Houston, who's coming off a loss to the pack because the other ones are kind of between top and bottom teams, and McGuffey plays a non-conference game or a non-state game against a team from West Virginia. The other conference, the Midwestern Conference, we talked about Mohawk at the top with their wins over New Brighton and Neshannock. And Laurel, who was my preseason pick to win the conference after their big win over Beaver Falls 2 weeks ago, beat Riverside handily this past week. And so this is another one where a lot of teams tend to kind of beat up on each other, a lot of really evenly matched teams in the Midwestern Conference. This will be fun to watch as the season rolls along. The 2 conferences that are starting conference play this week, the Allegheny Conference has 3 undefeated teams, Valley and Steel Valley. I still think Sarah Catholic is the team to beat there, but Ligonier Valley and Steel Valley both off to some really good starts. So should be a fun conference to watch as that one moves, killing everybody they've played this year. Another solid win this past week for the Vikings, looking like the favorites in 2A that many thought they were, myself included, at the beginning of the year. And then wrapping up with 1A, the Big 7 Conference has seen some teams beating each other now that, Union beat Rochester and then lost to Northgate. And so some teams have kind of, like we said, beat each other. Cornell has 2 wins. They play a big game against Union this week, and we'll see how that shakes out. If Cornell can stay at the top, if Union wins again, then they're right back in the mix. Our Lady of the Sacred Heart taking on Rochester, which those were the 2 teams I kind of thought at the beginning of the year were the class of the conference. So if Olsh wins that one, they have a pretty clear path to the conference title. Rochester really needs a win over Olsh to get back into the race. So that's a Saturday game. We'll see what happens in that one. Probably the 1A game of the week is Clairton taking on Bishop Canavan. Clairton started with 2 losses against teams from higher classification, so didn't really, make much of a blip on my radar because, those were 2 good teams that they faced. But in Steel Valley and Washington, so 2 teams, there's 2A teams that are still undefeated. And Bishop Canavan's off to a 5-0 start in 1A. So, really good start for both of those programs. Clairton's kind of been the team to beat for a while. Canavan's been rebuilding over the last few years and has built up a really good story for their program. So will be a fun one to watch this week as they go head to head for the top spot in the Eastern Conference on the line. And then, like we mentioned, Leechburg hanging around there in the middle of the conference. 5 teams are going to make the playoffs here. So as long as Leechburg's in that top 5, they're looking good to break that 32-year playoff drought.
Wow.
And then the Tri-County South Conference, West Green got another big victory over Avella this week, and they take on a 2-0 Carmichael's team with basically the top spot in the conference on the line. And so, we'll see what happens if West Green can back up my preseason prediction that they would be the conference champions. But, don't count out California either. California is a really good team. And Mapletown played California really tough this past week too. So they get a Monessen team that's off to a 2-0 start. So we'll see what happens here in the Tri-County South, but a lot of good games on tap this week, a lot of games between, teams that are sitting.
A lot of
currently at the top of the
meaningful
conference.
games for a change.
Yes. Well, we've had meaningful games all season, and we've had meaningful games that may mean more later on as we start to see
That
who's
is
in the
right.
mix
Right.
for
Meaningful
playoff
and
spots.
meaningful in one sense of the word, and not in the grand scheme of things, where meaningful in the fact that ultimately these games are going to determine whether teams are playing in November or not.
Yeah.
I mean, the games that were played prior to this, most of them didn't matter. And, that's the only thing that I've had to say about this whole process is that, your schedule, basically you have a 1 month schedule to get, 2 months worth of games. So, it is what it is. All the games in District 3 and District 1 and District 12 and District 11, it matter from the time that they, walk out on that field, in whether or not they do play in November or whether they don't. And that's not the case in the WPIAL. It's the single biggest difference in how teams are measured in the state of Pennsylvania. And it is what it is. I mean, you have success formulas on a 5-game season versus success formulas off of a 10-game season.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference.
It is. So actually, in full disclosure, you'll appreciate this. I ran some numbers this week, and I ran the District 3 formula that your guys use to rate teams. I figured out how it works.
Get this is incredible.
Yeah. So there's 2 things shown here. There's what I'm calling Gardner Points Plus. So remember the Gardner Points that I talked about before. So what I did for that one was I took a formula from District 6, actually. So if you beat a team in your same classification, you get 100 points for that win. If you beat a team from one classification lower, you only get 90. If you beat a team from a classification higher, you get 110. So basically it tweaks by 10 points on that base win number, depending on the classification. And then I also factored in number of wins that teams' opponents had. So like, if you beat a team from a lower classification, one lower, let's say a 3A team beats a 2A team, but that 2A team had 2 wins, right? So you get 90 points for the victory plus 20 more points for their wins. So that's 110 points. So this is the Gardner Points Plus formula I did. Oops, you don't need to see the formula, is basically, this is an average on a per game basis because I only factored games against WPIAL opponents. So some teams have played teams from outside the WPIAL. So I wanted them to match up on an even basis. So like Mount Lebanon has played 5 games against WPIAL opponents. So their number is based on a, whatever it is, out of 5. Central Catholic played that 1 game against Imhotep Charter. So theirs is only out of 4 games. But that kind of equalizes it across the board, that you don't have this big cumulative number. You've got an average per game number. So that's what the Gardner Points Plus number is. And then the D3 rating is I backed out the formula that District 3 uses to rate their teams and applied it to all the WPIAL teams so far. So just looking, Mount Lebanon and Central Catholic look like the top 2 teams in 6A. In 5A, you've got your 2 undefeated teams in Moon and Kiski at the top. But we talked about, so here's the thing, right? I talked about that Allegheny 6 conference that I thought 6 teams could potentially look like playoff teams. You've got Moon, you've got Peters Township, you've got South Fayette, you've got West Allegheny, you've got Bethel Park, and you've got Upper St. Clair.
Yeah,
so
like a Pine Richland.
Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of that's crazy.
Yeah. So So, based on these formulas and only, halfway into the season, but like, when I said those 6 teams were all really good, I mean, the 4 teams down here at the bottom are all in the Big East Conference too. So, that Allegheny 6 conference is pretty darn good top to bottom. So just moving across real quick here, 4A, Belle, Vernon, Hampton, being the undefeated teams. Like Coach Humbert mentioned that Laurel Highlands hasn't played opponents that have been, quite as good as some other teams. You kind of see that reflected in their ranking a little bit. And these are sorted based on the Gardner Points plus.
Sure.
So, if you shuffle them around, right, Thomas Jefferson, even with their 1 loss, still has a higher rating on the D3 scale than these 2 teams above them in Laurel Highlands and McKeesport. So something
Look
to
at
keep
it
in mind
with
there.
Stowe Rocks and Ligonier Valley or whatever like that. That's just crazy.
Yeah. So Stowe Rocks, Ligonier Valley, scoring very well in 2A. And actually we'll talk about 3A for a second. Central Valley, North Catholic look like, far and away, kind of the best 2 teams there this year. Although Avonworth, Elizabeth Forward probably still in the mix too. And obviously, this will change as the year goes on, but something to keep an eye on as we go. 2A, Stowe Rocks, Ligonier Valley, Steel Valley, Sarah Catholic, Washington, Laurel, pretty clearly among the best teams there. And then in 1A, Clairton maybe a little bit. But once again, this number, if we use the District 3 formula, would actually bump Clairton up, here above Union. Interestingly, Springdale, even though they're 0-2 in conference play, still has a pretty good ranking.
Right,
because
their strength of schedule, sure.
Yeah, well, and Springdale beat Deer Lakes, who was a 3A opponent, so that kind of helps. A 1A school beating a 3A school, helps the numbers a bit. So just it's fun to play around with a little bit, but at the same time, just
what you're trying to do is shut me up.
well, and
but that's okay.
Yeah. And, I mean, like Union beat Rochester, but Rochester's still a lot higher ranked. Let's see here. There's any other ones. West Green beat California head to head, but, California is still higher ranked based on the formula and how it works.
Sure.
So, and in both formulas too so far. So we'll see how it plays out the rest of the year, but just kind of, something interesting to keep an eye on since you're wanting to talk about the power rankings. I figured I'd
look, power rankings have the big thing where power rankings come in is not necessarily determining who does or doesn't get into the postseason. It's who does or doesn't host a home playoff game, and that's enormous. And in District 3 now, in the WPIAL, everybody's at Heinz Field. Well, in District 3, it's a home field advantage throughout. So if you're the number 1 ranked, like power ranked team, if you basically you control your own destiny of whether or not you're going to play a championship game at home. I think that's an enormous advantage. And that, so it, like I said, it isn't necessarily who gets in or out. It's where you play. And that's everything in the postseason.
Yeah. And I think the one thing I'll say that after having run the numbers on the formula is the one thing I don't like about both of them, both the Gardner Points plus one that I created and the other one, the District 3 one, is that they both place a lot of weight on the classification of the other school and not the quality of the team or the margin of victory, right?
Yeah.
So if a 1A school beats a really bad 3A school, they get a lot of credit for that in both formulas. I guess, with the Gardner Points plus formula that I made up, it does get mitigated a little bit because there's those little extra points for number of victories that your opponent has. But still, I feel like it gets like there's a big difference between beating a Brownsville or a York than there is to beating a North Catholic or a Central Valley or an Elizabeth Forward or someone like that.
Yeah,
so
there's always it's never going to be perfect.
No. Unless we go to ELO.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. Look, I like the fact that there should be some human intervention in this thing at all, which unfortunately the District 3 power rankings don't have. There's no human intervention, which I think there has to have, and especially now with like COVID games too. I mean, not even talking about all the games that these teams are missing because of COVID and everything else, and how that reflects. I mean, but that's why it allows us to do these shows and have plenty to talk about, right?
Yep.
We're over an hour, so I mean,
it's all good.
That's okay. I mean, Mike, Coach Humboldt, I mean, Humbert, just tremendous tonight. And Ian, I mean, you're just setting the bar way too high with all these stats, man. I mean, it just incredible. I mean, I love it. I mean, it's just perfect. So thank you so much, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing. It's what I do. I love stats. I love history. It's why I love high school football, because there's a ton of it. You can keep endless stats and history on everything.
Yeah, I know. It is great. And we hope that the fans, like all the stats and the history as well. And don't forget, I mean, everybody can send in their questions. I think that's a great ad. We're trying to improve the show, trying to get more fans involved. So you've got all week to send in your questions. So, we'll just keep pressing that issue all week long. And we had a couple of good ones. And in fact, from somebody that I even knew. See, you didn't even know that I knew somebody out that way. But, it is what it is. Yeah. So I'm glad.
Speaking of questions, I think you had one last one for me.
I did?
You did.
Yes. Right. One last question. And that is, we have a gargantuan game between Southern Columbia and Wyomissing this week. You're familiar with both of these teams because of, putting together everything for the state championships last year. What are your thoughts a little bit on Wyo and Southern Columbia?
So being a WPIAL guy, I want Clairton to hold on to the state record. So I really, really hope that Wyo wins this game. I was really pulling for Wyoming a couple weeks ago when they almost beat Southern Columbia. But I mean, Southern Columbia is just a machine, man. They're just so good. Wyo is good again, but from everything I've seen from them, they're not as good as they were last year. Still an impressive team and should be a factor in the playoffs, but just not quite as good as that team last year. Unfortunately,
I mean, it's hard to have a team better than someone who makes a state finals. I mean, come on. I mean, the same thing with Southern Columbia. I mean, my God, I mean that,
they still have that Garcia kid at running back,
defending state champions or whatever like that. So, I mean, look, it's,
so go Wyo, basically.
Yeah, right. Look, I mean, I think Wyomissing has a very good chance to win. I think that they've, I tell you what, talking to the Wyo guys and, a full disclosure, I mean, I drive through Wyomissing every morning to go to work. So it's like, but the very intriguing part, and I talked about this in the other show, the Wyomissing School District and the Governor Mifflin School District adjoin one another. I mean, you have these dominant public school, high school programs in the state that literally are back to back. Yeah. And for me, I marvel at that. I mean, how you can have such a concentration of football talent. And these are boundary schools, okay? They're not getting an influx of, not a private school or whatever. These are public boundary schools that adjoin one another, that are at the upper echelon of their classifications within the state, which just is crazy. But Wyo's got some players. I mean, they've got some players. They got some matchup problems for Southern Columbia for the first time in a long time. So I give Wyo a puncher's chance, just as we're both rooting for Wyo. So
yeah, and I will say on that note too, Clairton and Thomas Jefferson here are adjoining school districts, public school districts. Wow. That Clairton has dominated 1A and TJ's dominated 4A or
Yeah.
previously AAA. They were in.
That's good
So
stuff.
yeah, it's and there's always talk of like, oh man, if Clairton and TJ ever merged, like that team would be unstoppable. But it hasn't happened yet. But you never know. But yeah, it's just that thing where those schools that share a zip code, right? Clairton and TJ have the same zip code, and
That's
just
crazy.
dominant. Yeah,
it is crazy. But anyway, let's hope we get some more questions for next week. And that does it for the WPIAL Blitz Show this week. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to just kill the program and us for talk anymore. I don't know what's up with this Zoom. So I'm just gonna have to end it and there we go. Yes,
We'll put that
right there. See, now I can do that. Now I can end the recording and we can talk afterwards. So from my buddy Ian, I'm Badge. Hey, listen, we'll see you next week on the WPIAL Blitz Show.